Welcome. We are talking today about masculinity. And I think the masculinity topic is a fun one because I think people probably assume what we think about men instead of just asking us. But what I've noticed is there's definitely a shift in what we consider masculine, what we consider a man to be, and certainly a godly man to be. Recently, I asked my church during Bible study, what is a godly man? What makes a godly man? And they started giving me, different words that you would think of. And then I said, is that the same thing the world considers a godly man? And then you saw everybody's faces start to shift a little bit because it was kind of a hard question. I know I've noticed within the church, I feel like what we consider men in the church has changed. And obviously it has in the world. We're seeing things like toxic masculinity being thrown around, and not even thrown around, almost like masculinity is just toxic, period. It's what it is. So with this in mind, I wanted us to have a conversation today about what masculinity is, how we got where we were, and I'm interested in your perspective because I grew up in the church, so that has definitely been my foundation and my framework of what a man is supposed to be. But I'm interested in yours. First, I would like to know, what was your perspective as someone who came into Christianity as an adult? So you lived part of adulthood as a woman without any biblical basis or church instruction or anything like that. So let's start there. What was your version of masculinity? What did you think masculinity was before you came to the Lord?
Well, since I came to the Lord and really started going to church when I was about 30, I was already married by this point and had 3 children at that point, 4 children at that point. And so to me, an appropriate male masculinity was someone who cared for their family, who worked, who provided for his wife and his children, and was a protector. I expected my husband especially to be someone who would protect me if someone attacked our home or my character or our family or in some way. And so you always think about if someone broke in the middle of the night, who's going to get up? Who's going to be the interference between you and the trouble? We thought of men, at least in my circle, as ones who worked hard and they got dirty and they weren't afraid to be dirty and they weren't afraid to take on hard conversations. But they also were a man who considered other people. They always stood up for the weak. They stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. I grew up in the South, so we also saw men as ones who took care of a lot of outside big physical things. And I don't think that it was necessary. I think you could still be a good man, and masculinity was still good if you could earn money and pay someone to do those things because you were doing something else, but you still were in charge of those things. So not to split us off into gender roles necessarily, I never thought, well, if you have a masculine husband or head of household, then the woman had to be at home barefoot and pregnant, as they say. I didn't really equate that with that. We just equated it as we're a team, but I definitely expected masculinity to mean physically someone who could stand as the intercessor between me and trouble, me in danger, and my family in danger, and then someone who provided and also was sometimes the calm to the storm, who could speak, not always being the peacemaker necessarily, but someone who could find a good medium so that there would not be an escalation. And because things often escalate when emotions get involved between, anything really, but also that the man was the one who was the voice of reason. Okay, let's bring it down to a wise level. I will be strong if you need me. I'll be bold if you need me. I can do those things, but I also see wisdom. And so for me, that was the classic definition of what I saw masculinity to be. I never thought of it as toxic.
Yeah.
It didn't occur to me. It wasn't a buzzword then, but it never occurred to me that kind of a man's man, was toxic.
Yeah. So when you came into the church, did you start seeing a difference in how men were viewed within the church or what a man is supposed to be?
Definitely, when I come into the church, my husband didn't come with me right away. And so I immediately became one of those women who was very endeared when I saw men come to church with their wives and they seemed to be loving and caring and would go pray with them. And I think I think that was all great because I do believe a man should do that. And that's exactly what's happened now with my husband, but that has been a progressive journey. But I did see a lot of men step backwards in the Christian roles that I guess I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
And so I saw that more women did a lot of the work. They were the ones that were directing programs and decorating and cooking and selling and marketing and doing all the fundraisers, and a lot of their conversations dictated how this was going to go or that was going to go, and I felt like they were the backbone.
Yeah.
And I wondered, like, why was there such a separation? And then I increasingly also saw men being silent. And while I don't feel like that a woman is out of step being vocal in the church, we see that that's endorsed, especially in the New Testament. I did see a lot of men not standing up and not being vocal, and that there was a problem if they were.
Yeah. It seems like, thinking back over my years, and you brought up being in the South, probably is a little bit different perspective of masculinity here. We see a man who's not hunting and fishing and doing all this stuff, and minds start to wonder about what kind of man he is. But I grew up in different places. I grew up out west a lot of my time, where women are tough because you don't have a choice, right?
The pioneer spirit.
Yeah, like it's still there. And so that's probably shaped a little bit of my thought process on it, my upbringing, because I definitely was exposed to women who were like, don't open a door for me, I can open the door for myself, how dare you think? And I was a kid in the South, and I'm still looking for chivalry. Like,
right.
I'm down for that. I'm good with that.
Let's make that a statement. I love chivalry.
Yeah, I ain't got no problem with that.
I ain't got no problem.
But I think that culturally is probably a piece of it too. And I think it's what I always say, I think we talked about it in the last video too, of we let so much of our belief system be dictated by the world, and the problem is that the world and culture is changing, and God's word never changes. So we have to go back to, what does the Bible say? That was my point to that Wednesday night class. What does the Bible say? Because what the Bible says as a man is what a man is.
Right.
It doesn't much matter what our culture says, because I could be some places and a man could be, we used to use the term metrosexual, a man who's like very put together and he likes the way he dresses, and sometimes he would even carry like a bag that normally a man wouldn't carry or whatever. And in some places, they don't think twice about that.
Right.
You walk into some little towns around here, and it's like the jukebox is going to stop when he walks into the room, and everybody's going to turn and look, right?
It's all based on the physical appearance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I know my cultural experiences has probably affected it some, but I also, and my age probably too, but what I've seen in the church, when you talk about the men kind of taking a back seat, we've really extolled women as the more spiritual of the gender. And we like to praise women, I think, in that way. And sometimes it's been the necessity.
Sure.
I think that's the thing about women, is that women will step up and do what just has to be done. So if, we know statistically there are a lot of women who go to church in the situation you were in.
Sure.
They go by themselves. They're taking their children. They want their children to be raised in it, but the husband is not coming, or the husband's not supportive, or whatever that situation is. And then the woman has no choice but to be the spiritual lead, which I actually think, and I've been studying a little bit about this, about the Industrial Revolution. I know you've studied a little bit about this too. Where really that becomes the differentiation of what a man is in our culture. Everybody wants to blame it on women going to work. Everybody talks a lot about when women got access to birth control and women could go out and have jobs and all that stuff, how that's what changed our viewpoints of the genders, but it didn't. It happened way before that.
Right.
And we've seen that if you study the history in church as well, that's really when women started becoming predominant spiritual leaders in their houses. They were the ones going to church. But now their husbands are off at work, so now the women are leading the Bible study at home. The women are the ones praying for the kids. The dads, we can talk. Church people like to talk about the husband being the head of the house, but spiritually, that's usually not what's happening.
Right.
You hear that term batted around of the husband being the head in the household to mean and I've heard people say it to me even recently, that means the husband makes all the decisions in the house.
No.
That's not what that meant, but that's how they take it. But really it should mean he is leading this house spiritually. And I find in a lifetime in the church, rarely are we seen that be the true case.
I agree completely. When I come in and I thought, in my limited view from a pew back, seeing the husband with the arm around the wife, and if she went to the altar, he would go to the altar and pray with her and hold her hand. And I'm thinking, wow, they're doing that at home. And more, I found that that was not true.
Right.
That was only happening once a week. And what we really were needing to see as husbands who are helping their families do Bible studies and practicing what we see on Sunday mornings at home on a daily basis, and covering their children and their wife in their home in prayer. And I'm not saying that those men were putting on a show. I think that unfortunately our culture taught them, well, this is when you do this, and when you're at home, you don't have to do this, your wife's got it.
Right. And
that puts so much pressure on both the wife and the children to carry a load that they really they're looking for that leadership. We want it. I don't know about you. Well, I think I do know about you, but I want that. I desired it, and I didn't realize that what I was seeing in church wasn't always being acted on at home in those marriages. I was idolizing those marriages and thinking that's what I need and everything will work out. And the truth was is those women didn't have ideal marriages either.
Right.
They were just blessed at the moment that their husbands was sitting on the pew with them. They all weren't experiencing the kind of leadership that we really need.
Yeah. When you were talking, it reminded me in Ephesians chapter 2, where Paul's talking about the relationship between husband and wife. I'm going to start verse 25. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church, and he gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh and nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of the body, flesh and his bones. For this reason, man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. We talk a lot in Scripture when we're talking about husbands and wives. Almost always we're getting to that, okay, you have to obey your husband, which is not even what it was talking about anyways.
Not biblical. But
we're leaving out that the bigger responsibility was supposed to be on the husband, to say he has to die, be willing to die for his wife. He has to love her the way that God loves us, and that's a love we can't even understand. It has to be a sacrificial.
That's the word that
love.
come to mind, sacrificial love.
Yeah, because the word was agape. It literally meant a sacrificial, godly love that we have. But so much has been confused in the genders within the church, because you have one of the things I've been studying on the subject of masculinity is how there's been so much confusion within the church on what submission is, that the Bible did not talk to women as if they're children. And we've made it out that women are like children and they have to be governed and all that. And that's not what was happening at all in the scriptures. But we've gotten confused about that. And it's confused within the church. What is masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? I think the culture obviously is also doing this as well. And so some of it's affecting us. But I don't know. How do you think we're going to reconcile this thing of, not every man has to be the hunter, fisher,
right?
All the stuff.
No.
Okay.
No.
You don't. We're not saying you have to be that to be a man. But also, there seems to be a high percentage of feminized men within the church.
An effeminate spirit.
An effeminate spirit. There you go.
Okay.
That was the word I was looking for. Yeah.
The effeminate spirit that I have seen infiltrate the church in the last 20 years of my ministry is mind-boggling, and that we accept it and we say, well, they were raised by women.
Right.
They didn't have a masculine role. Their father mistreated them. And I validate all those things that happen, that form them, that form their personalities and things like that. But when we speak about effeminate, we're just not meaning about a physical appearance.
Right.
Or a lack of having a chainsaw in the back of your truck.
Right.
That's not what we're meaning.
Right.
Effeminate means always being, I want to say this, that they're not in the lead. They're not in charge. They're not able to take charge when it's needed,
right.
expected. And I think it all draws back to, and you ask how we're going to reconcile it, submission to the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. It all has to be that if you're not submitted to Christ, you cannot lead in submission, and you cannot expect submission. We have to be submitted to the Holy Spirit, which means that we are under His leadership, His guidance, and not just by the commandments of the Bible and the rules of the do's and the don'ts, but in His constant guidance of us. Go here, do this, say this, don't say that, speak now, don't speak, study, pray. When He's leading us on a daily basis and we're not submitted because we're not in constant relationship with Him, then how are we supposed to lead and showing, being the example of what submission is?
Well, here's an uncomfortable question.
Okay.
It comes out.
I thought we were already there.
Yeah. Because as soon as you start talking, you said we give the excuse of, well, they were raised by women. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let's Timothy. Is it Timothy you're about to go to?
So Timothy is praised by Paul, his spiritual father. And says the spirit that was in Lois and Eunice is in you, right? So obviously they had a great deal of influence in his life. That's wonderful. But he had a spiritual father.
Yes.
He can praise that the things that these women have, they put into you because they were the ones with you in those years. But he had a spiritual father to lean on. When we say, well, they're raised by women, basically that's what you get. That's a problem. Not in the sense of it's a problem if a child, well, God ordained a house with purpose.
Every child should get a father.
That's the way
and mother.
They should. That's not the way it always is, right? Whether there is divorce or whether there is someone is widowed or whatever it is, there are things that cause that not to happen. Obviously, there are
abandonment issues.
There are fantastic grandparents who will take in a grandchild or whatever. I'm not demeaning that in the house, but what I'm saying is Paul also was very direct that we're supposed to be teaching the younger ones within the church, and that the women are supposed to be teaching the girls, and that the men are supposed to be teaching the boys. In the church, one of my complaints that we could talk about another day is that we have taken specialized ministry and we made it segregated ministry. And so we separated out the children go to children's church, the youth go to youth group, and if you have a thriving youth group, the temptation becomes, hey, let's separate them out. They'll even get their own stuff on Sunday.
Middle school, high school, young adult, married couples, elders. We have segregated every section of the church, and that's not the way it was supposed to be.
No, and we're supposed to be interacting. How will they ever learn from the adults if they're never around the adults, right? And so when you said that, it kind of struck a nerve in me of, okay, they're effeminate. That's the house they come from. What did you expect? I expect that if you're a part of a church community, men should be the ones modeling for the young men what to be. Women should be modeling for young women what to be. We're both pastors. Obviously, that's a different scenario than people are used to. And they could use what I just said against me to say, well, see, she said that. No, what I'm talking about is there are principles that apply to all of us. There are biblical principles that apply to it does not matter if you're a man or a woman, a child or an adult or an elderly person. It's not going to make a difference. I'm teaching those things. But in lifestyle and in deed, we're supposed to be modeling. I take it very seriously. I try to shepherd everyone very well. I have boys. I'm trying to lead them well. But in my home, there's a lot of things that I have made a conscious decision to step back and tell my husband, you need to take the lead in the instruction in this area. You need to teach them as a man what to do, because I don't want my kids to be effeminate. I don't want that. That's not how God designed them. In the church, I take it I don't prefer the girls over the boys, but I have that same mindset of I will go to men in the church and I will say, this young man needs this, and I believe you can provide that.
Right.
You can disciple them, and I try to empower the men to do what I know I can't do, and I know I shouldn't do, because they don't see things like a man would see it. And sometimes they need that.
Well, they need it not, and I want to be clear, when we say effeminate, I'm not talking about mannerisms.
No.
I believe that a lot of people are clued in and thinking effeminate means their mannerisms, the way they dress, that they don't have a firm handshake, which I'll have to say does take your mind in places.
Yeah.
I won't lie about it, because I mean I'm flesh as well. I want to say that effeminate is by nature, the nature to step back instead of step up.
Oh yeah.
The nature to not take it upon yourself to be the lead in your own spiritual relationship with God, and that you don't need a woman, a wife especially, to nag you. You don't need a mother to prod you in that direction, to take the lead in that. That if your own spiritual journey, if you're not mentally well, if you're not spiritually well, if you're not emotionally well, to be the person that says, I am not these things and I need to have these things if I'm going to expect to have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship in my church, a healthy relationship at work. And so effeminate, I just want to be 100% clear. We're not just talking about mannerisms or the way a man dresses or whether or not they prefer shopping over hunting. All those things, speak to things in our culture. I want to say that effeminate by nature, in whatever nature you're given, we're supposed to reject nature and reject that sin and flesh that we've been passed down from Adam and take on the nature of Christ.
Right.
So that is a man's responsibility, and it cannot be given by anyone else. And I think that when men model that for younger men, and whether that's younger by age or younger, whether we're talking about maturity in Christ or maturity in age, can be different things. That's something they need to see in a man.
Right.
They need to see it in a man. They just need to see the example of how they are with other people in a church setting, and how they're I've heard of a lot of this, and we talked about this in our last video as well, about how some men think, well, I want my child to see how I treat my wife. That's a true statement, but it should not be exemplified by in a twisted sexual way. It should be like when I comfort my wife, when I ask my wife, how can I help you? When I tell my wife, yes, I will do that, and then I model that and actually go do what I say I'm going to do. That's the kind of behavior that a child needs to see the father model for the wife.
Yeah.
And always seeing a mother struggle, always having to see a wife having to balance things that she shouldn't have to balance in life, and not seeing that help and comfort. There's only one way to teach that, and that's a man.
We also, I think, we like to praise the idea of the superwoman, and we like to throw accolades on it. Thank yous are nice. It's nice when somebody notices that.
Sure.
It's better to take some of the weight off.
The load off.
So you don't have to be that, so that you're freed up for the other things that really do matter. But I think that's also something, because the church is really, really bad about praising busyness and thinking that keeping a full calendar means you're really spiritual, and that doing everything and never telling anybody no makes you just this super obedient person. No, it doesn't. It makes you a burned out person who's going to quit. You will if you do that in ministry, in a church, you do everything you're asked. You never set out boundaries. You never say no. You're the person that people say, oh, they'll say yes. You're in trouble.
If they propose a project in a council meeting or in a committee meeting, and your name is always brought up as the person that will just ask them, there's a problem with you. My name should not be constantly brought up as the person that we know she'll do it, because that is no better than a yes man in suits.
Yeah.
Yet another role we're not supposed to have.
Right.
We must be the kind of person that we say, we will consider it in prayer, or I already know that is too much for me and I cannot handle it, and I will take my eyes off of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. Busyness is praised as some kind of accolade. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be, because the priority, if it's really for what Christ has called us to do, we should never take anything seriously unless it's in prayer. And you and I both have had that discernment when we see somebody walking across the room, we know we're about to ask to do yet another thing. And that takes us off what our priorities are, and it has to be a no.
And as a leader, we need to respect, because we're in leadership roles. As leaders, we need to respect people when they set the boundaries and not say, well, they told me no, I'm Xing them off the list. What if we started saying, wow, that's a person who understands that God has given them a family, and they're looking out for that family, and they're protecting. They're showing a great deal of ministry to the most important ministry that God has entrusted to them. Maybe we honor that and respect it, and say when things clear up, let me know. Now I want to be careful. There are definitely people who just use their family's excuse to never do anything.
Oh, sure.
That's something totally different. I'm not talking about those people, but I get really frustrated when we keep praising that, and that's hitting my mind, because I think women probably even more so are more apt to be people pleasers and to not say no to things, and then the church is praising them for not saying no, and
how great is it when we can say, I don't think my husband's going to let me. It's the best ever, because I know when they go straight to Wendell and they say, Wendell, we asked your wife if she'd be willing to do this, and she just said that she didn't think you would agree, and we just thought we'd come talk to you. And he's like, oh no, she don't have time for that. And it's great, because I know that he's going to be like, she doesn't need anything else on her plate. She has more than enough. And I'm not talking about just in church. This could be in any kind of setting where he knows the load I already bear, and he is so ready to say, no, less. You need less, because you need to focus more about what's in front of you. And I love that. I love being able to say, I don't think my husband's going to agree with that.
Which comes back to being the protector, being in that protective role. We've lost that. You know, back onto the topic of what I thought we were starting at, that I took us somewhere different, but that's okay. We're going to trust the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
When we start talking about gender roles, I think I want to be really plain about this, because people think I'm out here girl power, rah rah.
No.
You know, of course, I grew up in the '90s with. I grew up in the '90s. I have a picture that I love of me in my girl power shirt. I was probably going to play my Spice World PlayStation game and probably watch an episode of Designing Women, because of
course we were.
What 8-year-old was not watching Designing Women? And then they wonder how I came out like this in the end. So I know people think I probably just eschew all gender roles, but that's not true. The truth is, Paul talks about us being the weaker vessel. There's a really important point, which is that physically we are.
Oh, yeah.
Physically, we just are.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it's okay to admit that. When we're talking about equality, we're talking about intellectual equality, we're talking about spiritual equality.
Yes.
I don't think you can find anything that scripturally to back up that we are less than in our intellect or in our spirit.
Emotion either.
Right. But physically, it's just a fact.
Right. And even women who can come up and be physically strong is not the majority. And let's be honest, those women are also not having to bear children, raise children, and then also go and do all, because we like you said, we idolize that we can do it all and have it all. At what cost?
Well, and here becomes the other thing is, now I might say somebody can pop off with some outlier, I'm sure.
We're going to get letters.
But here's the deal. People write on me before, it's okay. Here's the deal. You can take the strongest woman, and she could probably beat some of the men.
Yeah.
But you put the strongest woman against the strongest man,
and she ain't going to be able to beat him.
Because we are
the weaker.
We are genetically, biologically designed a certain way. And that's not a bad thing for us to admit. It's being proven right now. There's big controversies in police departments where they're trying to get a certain percentage of women. And so what they're having to do is lower the physical standards so that the women can meet it. This is my opinion. Girl, preach. I'm here. I want to support, not all women, but I want to be supportive of women and what they're doing and be the cheerleader for them. If my house is on fire, send me the most toxic man you can possibly send me. If my house is on fire, I want Joe Rogan and Jocko to kick my door down, and they can be doing their podcast and like yelling at men to tell them to go get in an ice plunge or whatever it is.
Send them with 2 axes and the fire hose over their shoulder and dragging bodies out.
I don't need you to look like me. I don't need you to understand me. Don't, because if I could get myself out, I would have. I cannot. Don't send me. Don't send me. But if we're walking in a room that requires emotional intelligence, and we're walking in a room that's going to require instant surveying of that room,
spiritual warfare,
send me.
Send me.
Come get me. I don't want Joe Rogan. Come get me. There are different ways that the Lord uses us.
Sure.
I don't believe that the Lord gave them this increased physical strength and then that meant that they have more than we do. I think it's balanced out. A good example of this, I think it's funny. There's a funny video that's going around that is it's showing the man and he's walking through the mall or whatever with his wife, and it's playing what's in his mind, and in his mind he's like, there's an exit over there, there's a danger this way, I could get out this way, we could get out in 30 seconds, and then it says in the woman's mind, and it's making the way downtown, walking fast, and she's paying no attention. That's true.
It is true.
It is true. I'm married to a cop. That is my life, right? Although I also try to be vigilant. But I do think that's true. Probably because these men are listening to Jocko and Joe Rogan and all this stuff. However, I also think that women have had to be on guard, and we do have an ability to read people.
Amen.
And I do think it's a heightened ability in women that a lot of men don't have because they haven't had to have it. And that's why we can look at somebody and survey them and say to our husband, that's a problem. And they think we're just judgmental, or they think we just don't like anybody. It's like, no, we've had to spend our entire lives knowing, because we knew we were physically weaker. We have had to be able to look someone in the eye and figure out, are you a danger to me or are you not?
Your friend or foe. I mean, think about it. Even in middle school, who are the mean girls? They acted like your friend. Come sit with us. Come talk to us, because they were probing for information. They were going to use that same information against us in gossip and to tear us down when it benefited them. So we have been having to gauge from a very young age, is this person my friend? Is this person my enemy? Are they my frenemy? Do I need to keep tabs on them? Because we never knew when that was going to turn on us and they were going to use us. And so I think that we have grown up with a early emotional intelligence. It does not mean it lacks in men. It just means it's something that we've had to use more than they have in certain situations. Because, a guy will go up and say, that's my buddy, that's my friend, and I'll go give him $100 and I'll go help him if he asks for help. But that doesn't mean that they're close and that he's going to have any feelings if that guy never talks to him again. Whereas we are going to look at that and gauge that and say, what was that intention? And often we're right.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but often we have our reasons to be very suspicious.
Well, they call it a women's intuition, right? I do think part of it, this might sound silly, I think part of it is because, again, biologically, we are designed that child care falls to us in those early ages, right?
Sure.
You have
Nurture.
to give birth to the child, you got to nurse the child, and especially when nursing was the only choice, that meant you also had to keep that child literally on
your body,
so your body can produce for that baby. But it also meant that we have to be able to see cues, literally from a baby who cannot speak, right? So we have to know nonverbal cues to keep our children alive.
To interpret, right?
Right, and so we have that inside of us. We also have just that sense of like I said, walk in a room and know, can I trust this person or not? Because if I am lacking in physical strength, you think about like fight or flight. Well, flight's going to take a minute. I need a running start to get away from you. So I have to pick up a lot faster than somebody who's just going to, let's throw down on the floor.
Right, exactly.
And have it out. I think there's something probably anthropologically about that. I've never researched it, but I just feel like it must be the truth. So I say that to say there are things that God has placed in men where they are superior. There are things God's placed in us that I think are superior. In a lot of ways, we are not superior to them.
No.
I'm just saying that God did design us differently. Thank you for joining us for this Girl Preach conversation on masculinity. We hope that you'll like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any content, including part 2 of this conversation dropping next week. We hope to see you there.